Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents, college counselors, students, and anyone who wants a weekly 90-minute deep dive into the world of college admissions.
My name is Dave. I'm a parent of a daughter in college, and we live in Chicago, Illinois.
My name is Lisa. I'm a clinical psychologist and a college counselor. I am a parent of a boy in elementary school, a girl in middle school, and a girl in college. After 30 years in Chicago, we recently moved to North Carolina.
My name is Mark. I'm a college coach in Atlanta and the parent of two daughters. Karis, a graduate of Davidson College, and she is the founder of the Spanish tutoring company, SpanishHelpToday.com. And Joy is a graduate of the University of Georgia, and she is getting her master's degree at North Carolina State University.
This week in the news, Things That Make You Go, by Brennan Barnard of Forbes. Our question from a listener is things Mark thinks would surprise listeners if you were to work in college admissions. That's part 2 of 3. Our interview is with Peterson and Kellen Manning, 2 MIT admission officers, discuss what applicants need to know about social media. That's part 1 of 2. And our college spotlight is College of Wooster in Wooster, Ohio. That's part 1 of 2.
How's the birthday guy doing over there, man? We gave you last week off. You haven't done anything exciting for the big birthday?
Yeah, you know, it feels great to be 39 years old.
We'll leave it at that, man. We'll say no more. We'll say no more. You sound revived and refreshed.
That's correct. Well, I won't tell everybody how old we truly are, but let's just say that we are honorary members of the blue pill generation.
Only a doctor would say that. Only a doctor. Only a doctor. Oh, my goodness. Okay, friends. One announcement today, because we got a lot to cover, and then I want to dive right in. So we sent out our first historical of YCBK Plus. And it was Lisa's article on test anxiety. And very pleased, thank you for everybody who sent comments in. I just wanted to let everybody else know, if you did not sign up to get YCBK Plus, you can do it at any time. Just go to yourcosmickin.com. You'll see it on the right side of the page, to sign up there. And what we're going to do is, the start of every month, anybody new who signed up, we'll send this out again the first week in April. And then we'll send it out again first week in May. And then first week of June, my article on demonstrated interest will go out. So very successful first article, and we're pretty excited about it. YCBK Plus. All right, Dave. So my admissions tip. It's going to take me a little time to do this one, but I think it's worth it. So I'm always railing about the rankings. You know, and I think sometimes people think that, ranking schmankings, all you're trying to do is put a positive spin on bad news. Everybody knows what the best schools are. No, I actually believe you cannot trust the rankings. You've heard me say things like, why would you outsource your view of beauty to somebody else? And you've heard me say things like, the rankings are all over the place based on the formula. This school's 413 here, it's 38 here. I don't think that really resonates like the power of an example. So I'm going to give you an example. I get really personal in my own life here. Probably as personal as I've ever gotten. And to make a point. So in 2008, we made up our mind that we were going to leave Westchester, Pennsylvania after having a great 12 years there. It was awesome. And we were going to move. And so the question is, where do you move? So we formulated what were the most important things to us. And for us, there were 6 really non-negotiables. First, we wanted a lower cost of living. We were looking for more house, more yard, without the mortgage going up. So cost of living was a big factor. Those of you who don't know, my wife has multiple sclerosis. She's had it for 20 years. So we've been a one-income family for 20 years. And I was working at a school as an associate director of admission, making $73,000. Pretty tough to support a family off that much. And $5,000 got chopped off that because my kids, I was fortunate, they could go to the school. I only had to pay 10%. They got 90% tuition remission, but that was still $50,000, which means I had 10 and the school picked up 45, which I'm grateful for that, but it did chop our income down into the 60s. So it was tough to make ends meet. So one thing for us was cost of living. Next thing, we wanted to both be within 1,000 miles of our parents. So Anitra's parents are in Detroit, Michigan. Well, they were at the time. Her dad actually passed. Since then, they've moved. But at the time, her mom was in Detroit, Michigan. Now she's in Tennessee. And Dave knows my parents are south of Toronto, both alive. Warmer weather. Everybody knows that. If you heard one episode of the podcast, you know I'm a weather weenie. So that was a given. Dave's like, why wasn't that number one?
That's right.
So we had to have.
I know. Mark is not visiting me in January ever again in life. He will call.
Yes, that's pretty much true. Two places I like in the summer. One is Chicago, another is Minneapolis. Next thing, we wanted to be close to a major city. So we looked at major cities. That's just us. We like to have access to major cities. Fifth, Dave and I were both raised in Christian homes, and we wanted some of those values inculcated, instilled in our kids. This is a crazy world out there. You try to give your kids roots and wings. Wanted to give our kids some roots. So we were looking for quality Christian schools. They weren't in a Christian school. We thought it would be good for them to have that experience. And the last thing was both a lot of diversity as well as a sizable Black community. I've had the experience of being the only Black kid in the class. No, thank you. Didn't want my kids to go through that. I knew when I was recording this, there was a 7th factor in our personal rankings, but it didn't pop into my head until I was editing this episode. We wanted a quality in-state affordable option in case I wasn't making that much money in Georgia. Both North Carolina and Georgia had some great in-state options, and the cost of attendance for the in-state schools was a fraction of what they are at a place like Penn State's main campus. So those 7 factors became the basis for us creating our own personal rankings, and we just literally ignored all those best places to live rankings that are out there. So all those things combined to be priorities for us. And this is what I'm encouraging you to do when it comes to college. So those things led to Atlanta, Raleigh, and Charlotte. They were by far the best 3 places that matched our value system of what we were looking for. Now, my brother Norm's been in Denver for 30 years. He'll tell you any day Denver's better than any of those cities, Atlanta, Raleigh, or Charlotte. Dave's sister, Kim, she's the true New Yorker. She bleeds New York City. Dave's 2 brothers, they bleed Toronto. Dave's wife, Frida, give her Chicago. My cousin Ellen, LA's the best. You look up, there's a book you can get on Amazon called 100 Best Places to Retire. You know what 3 of the best places to retire based on the rankings and their formula, and they go through all their formula there. Ogden, Utah, Traverse City, Michigan, Gulfport, Mississippi. They may all be great places. God bless you if you live there. We have zero interest in those. They don't match our personal view of rankings, what's important to us. And that's an example of what I want everybody to do when it comes to colleges. You customize what matters to you and build your own list and ignore all the noise. Ranking colleges is like ranking churches. You can't do it. You can do your own version of ranking the top churches or places of worship in your area, but you certainly would not respect anybody telling you this is the best house of worship in the city of Chicago. You'd be like, who are you to tell me how I want to worship? And that's how I want people to approach college. So that's my tip.
And let me add to that Mark turned me on to an amazing podcast by Malcolm Gladwell. You might know him. He's written such books as David and Goliath, and he dedicated 2 podcast segments on those rankings and how just simply changing a few criteria by manipulating the rankings, it could totally change the rank order of certain schools, and how there's so many prejudices, financial and otherwise, lie between those rankings. So to add to that point, check out Malcolm Gladwell. He has a great segment on his podcast. I believe it was last year, and it really does a deep dive into what Mark is talking about.
Yeah, that podcast called Revisionist History. And just to prove Dave's point even more about change one thing here, change one thing there, the rankings make a tweak every single year. They change it every single year. Why? You don't need to buy the magazine if it's the same. So every single year they tweak it just because it's going to drive sales, So there you go.
And we also talked about how many schools, their ulterior motive of going test optional was because it drove up the number of applications, which allowed them to reject so many more people, and it drove down their selectivity score, which raised them in the rankings, i.e. University of Chicago. So these schools manipulate the rankings every year, all the time.
Yeah, and that's obviously a two-sided thing. There are positive reasons for going test optional, but they're not naive about the fact that it's going to make them look more selective. It's going to be in their marketing interest. Even if maybe sometimes their main reason might be other things. They're well aware of that side benefit. Now, for my admissions vernacular, Dave, the word is flat. Flat. And if let me know if you need a hint.
Yeah, give me a little bit of hint.
So the hint would be, this would be a term an admission officer might use to describe a kid. The kid is flat.
Kid's flat. Well, I know in medicine, when you're flat, you can have a flat affect. So that means that, you just don't have any spirit, any soul. You don't have any uplifting. You get sort of like soda without the fizz.
Oh, so man. You know what I have here in my notes? Soda without the fizz. That's what I put down. Like soda without the fizz. Flat is actually I know that's cold, but I used to refer to that as dull as dishwater. So that it feels flat is better than being dull as dishwater.
Well, there's a saying, Mark. Mm-hmm. If you BS long enough, you're going to get it right one of these days.
You would know. You would know, Captain. You would know. All right, big number. And this is going to be something I'm going to talk about as it relates to our article. So Harvard had 9,406 early action applicants this year. That's not in the article. I just pulled that from my own research. Northeastern had over 50,000 early action applicants, more than 5 times as many applicants as Harvard for early action. And that is the big number of the day. That's the class of 2022, current year. Now, Dave, last week I had Vince on. Thank you, Vince. You did an awesome job. Good job on that one.
And now it's time for Hot Topics in the News.
All right. So, look, for this article, I think it's special that we have to cue up a little music because it's interesting because most people are like, things that make you go, And Brennan Barnard is one of these guys, I call him like white boys with soul. It's like Mick Jagger, And he starts off by referencing a dance group, CNC Music Factory, as the theme of his article. And I know most of our listeners have no idea who CNC Music Factory is. So I thought it was only fair to give them a taste. So let me see if this works here. Okay, how's the volume, Mark?
Good.
All right. So, for all y'all stuck in the hip hop of the 80s, this is CNC Music Factory. So he starts off with 17 and I was having a ball, 11th grade, and I knew it all. I fell in love for the very first time with this girl. She really blew my mind. And basically, he basically says that over 30 years as a high school counselor, Brennan helped young people identify good matches, good colleges matches. But there's a lot of things that make him go, every year. And that he's saying it's important to acknowledge that at the majority of higher education institutions in the country, those that accept many more students than they deny is increasing, and their decisions are very unpredictable. What he's saying with application trends is many of these selective colleges continue to see a multi-year trend of increasing application numbers, often with percentages in the double digits, that far outpace any growth in the number of applicants. Gary Clark, the director of admissions at the University of California, said, "At my campus, we're seeing a significant increase among our strongest applicants. The increased number of applications combined with the move away from standardized testing has led to declining admit rates and increasing uncertainty around admission outcomes." He adds, "I think this reiterates the value of having a strong list of colleges as a prospective student." So he also references Northeastern, and he says, parents ask how Northeastern University has a lower early acceptance rate than Harvard University. Meanwhile, colleges use enrollment tactics that are not always student-centered. One practice is the practice of deferring students' early applications and then to to be a competitive candidate, encouraging them to convert to a binding early decision plan, only to deny the students admissions in the end. So I'm not going to go through the whole article, but basically what it's saying is all these trends are leading to increased uncertainty about kids and getting into selective colleges. And I just want to quote one other person who says that finding the college that will help one be successful isn't a matter of gaining admission to X school. It's a matter of going somewhere that can take you down the path to your goals and working hard when you get there. And he says, admission is a door to a path, and there is more than one door and more than one path. Getting an acceptance isn't the ultimate goal, and denial or waitlist or deferral isn't the ending. So I'm going to stop here, Mark, and see you want to take that. I just really touched on some of the highlights of this article.
Actually, I'm glad you did, because I have quite a few things I want to share as well.
Yeah.
So basically, yeah, the name of the article, as Dave said early, is play off that song, things that make you go, And he's talking about what is going on out there. Why is it so bizarre? Everybody's pulling out their hair, trying to figure out what is happening in this crazy world of college admissions. And so what Brennan does is he interviews a number of directors of admissions and a number of college counselors just to get their take on things. But one thing he starts out saying, and we cannot emphasize this enough, and I want to quote it because it's really important. So I'm going to read verbatim. It's important to acknowledge that at the majority of higher education institutions in this country, those that accept the vast majority more than they deny, the chief priority is simply to fill their class. Dave and I have run in the newses before how many schools are still taking kids in July. And he said at these schools, things are so much more predictable. But then he goes on to say, those are not the schools everybody's talking about. We're talking about this other group. So he starts out by talking about 6 reasons why application trends are up and it's so much harder to get in. And I agree with every single one of them. First, technology-enabled ease of application submission. So being able to apply online, use of the Common App and other apps like that makes it easy to submit. 2, test optional movement. 3, free applications and simplified apps. We've talked about things like VIP apps and Snap apps and things before. 4, college marketing efforts. 5, other growth is due to the uncertainty-fueled shotgun approach. In other words, what he's referring to here is, the more hysteria, the more you hear that it's getting harder to get in, the more I better just add 5 more applications to the mix, which just creates more of a vicious cycle. And then the 6th one is one Dave already read, which is Gary Ross, the VP and financial aid at Colgate, basically saying all these new virtual visits have blown our applicant pool up. And if you remember when I interviewed Courtney Minden at Babson, she actually thought all the virtual offerings has contributed more to the increase in growth than even the test optional movement. So he gives a little bit of background. Those are the 6 things that are creating the frenzy. Then there are several people he quotes from, but one thing that he says that I thought was really interesting, because just a little bit of background for those of you who are new. Brennan and I worked together from 2001 to 2004 at the Westtown School. He was Associate Director of College Counseling to Susan Tree. It was the director who trained both of us. And later in this article, he quotes Shireen Herndon Brown, who actually was Brennan's predecessor. So all of us know each other. We all work together at the same school. But one thing Brennan says in this article, and this is a real candid acknowledgement by him. This is what he says. The longer I've been in this field, the more I have realized that admission outcomes are unpredictable and based on factors well beyond my pay grades. That's a big acknowledgement. So in other words, you'd think that I've been doing this work since 91, because Brennan did also do college admissions at Franklin Marshall, where he graduated from as well. So you'd think, well, I've been doing this 30 years. I got this. And it basically saying the opposite. No, the more I've been in this, the more I'm scratching my head. Which is a real candid acknowledgement on his part. But what the article does is it attempts to explain all the reasons why admissions is so bizarre. And I immediately reached out to Brennan. I said this. I said, Brennan, I think I've read 60 to 80 articles between all your articles that you've done, whether it's Huffington Post, Washington Post, or Forbes. I said, I think this article explains better than any of your others the frenzy that we have out here in college admissions. And for those of you who want to read it, put it out on Twitter. We put everything out on Twitter at YCBK Podcast on Sunday, so you can read the article ahead of time. So if you haven't done that, This is definitely worth you going back and reading this article. So what are some of the reasons besides what I mentioned to you there, the 6 reasons why applications are up? Well, I'll go through some of the things that Brennan mentions that I thought were really noteworthy. And one of them is, this is one of my absolute favorite ones. It's so powerful that I feel like I need to read it. So Dana Lambert, who's a school counselor at West Milford Township High School, New Jersey, says this. And when I was reading this, Dave, I was like high-fiving myself. Hallelujah. Listen, if I had any athletic ability left anymore, I'd try to backflip. That's how much I was agreeing with this so much. She says this, it's numbers. It's not magic. No one is guaranteed admission, she explains. I have students who are surprised that other kids who they don't see as equally qualified get in, and they don't know why. But when questioned, those students who were deferred or denied showed little to no interest in the college. They didn't always respond to emails. They didn't attend virtual events or attend in-person events. She adds, colleges are more eager to have students that want to be there than those who saw them as safeties. Lambert points out that the profiles that colleges publish are a snapshot of students who have been admitted in the past. She said, just because a student fits the profile doesn't mean they're going to get in. It never has been that. The denial pool looks similar to the admit pool. UVA took a lot of criticism, Dave, 3 years ago when they became the first public flagship school to have early decision. Because early decision is seen as something that privileges people that have resources because you don't have to compare financially at offers. And you're supposed to be a public school. Why are you doing early decision? This is right around the same time when I was interviewing Greg Roberts for our podcast. And I saw him twice within a 2-month period. And so I saw him both in Georgia as well as in Boston. And I was talking to him because, man, the arrows were coming from his head at the time. But here's what people don't realize. University of Virginia, one of the most prestigious public schools in the country, Dave, take a guess what their yield was when they had early action. We all know yield is the percentage of accepted admits that choose to enroll. Take a guess what it was.
50%?
2%.
2%.
2%. Early action.
Early action is where I admit you, but I still give you the chance to play around the field and decide. In other words, I say I'm going to take you to the prom, but I'm still giving you the option to see if there's somebody else, the football player comes along and invites you instead.
All right, Dave. As smart as you are, man, I've been working with you for 9 years. You can never get early action right.
Oh, jeez.
No, you got it right, but you keep always being confused. Early action, early deadline, early notification date, but you don't have to commit until May 1st, right?
Right.
Versus early decision, early deadline, early notification date, but you're committing, either in November or January.
Yeah.
So what happens is a lot of students will apply early decision somewhere.
Yeah.
And then they'll look for some early action backups because they hear, gee, you got a better chance of early action. Or just in case I don't get in my ED, I want to have some good EAs. And then people are like, hey, you're playing me.
That's right.
And so, they just, on the private school side, you'll see a lot of deferrals. And on the public school side, 2% of people were coming as people take a shot at ED and then they EA to Virginia.
So just to clarify, because I always get this confused, I want to make sure our listening public,
Sure.
What you're saying is if I'm going to accept you early, I am not going to give you the option of putting me in the back pocket to see if a nicer looking Prince Charming comes along. I accept you early and you're committing early, period. And that's what Virginia realized they had to do because they were just wasting their time doing early decision, and people were then just ditching them for the brighter person that came along in June or whatever.
Yeah, pretty close. I mean, it's a little bit more complex than that, but you got the idea. Like just to be a little bit more precise, public schools tend to function a little different than private schools here. But the problem with the public schools is they still need to project their number, and UVA over-enrolled. So it became extremely hard to predict who's coming and who's not coming. So they put early decision in one way so they could better predict who was going to enroll so they wouldn't over-enroll or under-enroll. Private schools, they operate a little differently typically. They don't want to lower their acceptance rate, which hurts their brand. Remember, you build your brand by scarcity. They don't want to hurt their acceptance rate for somebody who's just playing them for a backup. I was talking to 4 of my students who got deferred by Case Western. And I talked to all of them and I said, can I ask you an honest question? They weren't in your top 3, were they? And every one of them kind of admitted, no, they kind of weren't in my top 3. So schools are like figuring that out through sophisticated methods and then deferring people. So that's kind of what we're referring to here. That's what Dana Lambert said. So she said, so that's one reason. Okay. Schools are admitted and interested in admitting people who will come, not admitting you because you met some mythical standard of acceptability and you deserve to be admitted because you were really strong. That's not there. You're operating off different metrics. You're thinking, was I worthy of admit? And they're thinking my goal is enrollment, not passing out badges, trophies, and ribbons. So 2 different goals on the part of 2 different people. There's another thing Dana Lambert says in here that I absolutely loved as well. She says, I may have the money and time and be the biggest fan in the world, but if there are 100 seats and 10,000 people want to get in, some are not going to be able to go. And this is the same example that I just used with Lisa, talking about, I thought I was showing off my contemporary knowledge, and I was like, Taylor Swift, Justin. She had to call me out. But the point is, I used all these examples. You got Beyonce, you got Drake, you got all these people, and they announce a free concert and in your city, and there's only 500 seats. Well, guess what? You got a problem if 50,000 people line up. So that's her point of it's a numbers game. She says, handling rejection and readjusting one's sales is part of life. It's a skill we model for our kids every day. I have to trust and model that for my students, that the professionals, my colleagues, making the decision, do so with reason to craft the absolute best class for their institution. I have to trust that. I may not understand it. I may not agree with it, but I have to respect it and accept it. Ultimately, Lambert argues, finding a college that will help one to be successful isn't a matter of gaining admission to X school. It's a matter of going somewhere that can take you down the path to your goals and working hard when you get there. She adds, admission is a door to a path, and there's more than one door, and there's more than one path. Getting an acceptance isn't the ultimate goal. And I was saying, hallelujah, shout from that. And that doesn't mean it's not hard for people.
Right.
Now, Brennan goes on to quote Andy Borst, who's the director of undergraduate admission at University of Illinois Champaign-Urbana, U of I. He has some more profound things to say. He talks about basically, this is the big flagship school for Illinois where Dave lives, where Lisa used to live. He's kind of coming at it more from the UVA Greg Roberts standpoint. Like, you got to understand, like, it's really hard for us too, trying to figure out, like, filling, like, not over-enrolling or not under-enrolling. So here's what he says. Admission directors at a small portion of universities are trying to shape their class to be large enough to meet our revenue expectations, but not too big as to exceed campus resources and space. In other words, we take too many people, where are we going to put you?
Right.
Our projection models rely on past behavior to estimate how many students will accept our offer. He adds, right now, projection models have a large amount of variance. In 2020, the pandemic suppressed yield rates, the number of students who enrolled in an institution where they were offered, to be below what we projected. As we return to more in-person in 2021, yield rates have rebounded to well above what we project. In other words, pandemic threw everything off for us. We have our traditional models of knowing we need to, if we have a 50% yield and we need 5,000 students, then we know that we need to accept 10,000 to get 5. But everything changed with the pandemic. People decided not to go to college. They decided to delay college, take a year off. They decided to stay closer to home. It threw everything off. Then the next year, there was an overcorrection. So, just have some patience with us because we're in a really difficult situation too, and we're trying to get it right. And he goes on to say, evidently, students and those who support them are not the ones feeling the most perplexed. Borst offers this prediction for the spring, and others like Rick Clark and others have said the same thing. Gary Clark have said the same thing. I think students and parents can expect some universities to try to ease into their enrollment targets by relying more heavily on waitlists compared to the past 2 years. He says, I know this creates anxiety for students, but it also does for the institution. We're all balancing competing priorities and trying to make the best decision. In other words, one way of not having this over-enrollment, under-enrollment thing is to waitlist people. That way you don't over-enroll, and then you can go to your waitlist if you need spots. So those are just some of the things that jumped off me in this article. Probably the last thing I mentioned, Shereen Herndon-Brown, my former colleague, and Brennan and I, all three of us. So I have to quote him in here. He said, school counselors and consultants like myself are reevaluating how we counsel students. He says we have to be ultra conservative and almost expect early decision and early action deferrals. And we need to tell families that. And I'll share this really quickly, Dave. I got a call from a family yesterday. It was a referral from a family that I've worked with before a couple times. And we got into the meeting. It was a really good session. And they said, "Can I tell you why we're here?" And they're I'm not going to say too much because I have to be careful about confidentiality. But they're at one of the real fancy smancy private schools in this country, this student. And they said, "We're here because our school counselor gave my child, who's one of the top kids in their class, these schools for their college list." And they were schools that, the family was insulted by. And I defended the college counselor 100%. I talked about, you have to understand, in this environment that we're in, it's a job as a college counselor to protect you and to have some high probables that you'll have like a 95% chance of getting in that could also meet your needs. And that's basically what Shireen is saying here. Like, it's shaping up how we have to do everything. We have to be ultra conservative. Because if I sit here and tell you that, you got a good shot at this schools and you really don't, then everybody's disappointed. So anyway, I've said a lot. I like this article a lot. It basically attempts to explain why is it so hard to get into more competitive schools these days. Any final thoughts from you, Dave?
Well, I'd like to close with the quote of Candace McKay. Brendan Barnard closes his article with this quote, and I'd just like to read it. I think it's a very good one. Candace McKay, a college counselor at the Los Angeles Center for the Enriched Studies Magnet School, reinforces all these messages. She says, with admission, there are two things you cannot underestimate: the challenging landscape and the applicant pool. When the love from colleges seems unpredictable and perhaps not so much in the air, being transparent, reflecting, and empowering students are some of the ways that I counsel students and families about their college discussions. And then she writes, who you are becoming is more important than the outcome of your college decisions. Appreciate the process and the results. With every rejection is a redirection. As the saying goes, no one is you, and that's your power. And so I really like that idea, particularly with every rejection is a redirection. So recognize, don't take it personally. It's purely just a numbers game. Expand your college list and realize that life is a process. And simply because you're rejected is not really a rejection. I like the phrase, it's a redirection towards finding and empowering what's truly you.
No, that's a good place to stop. And I know this is hard,
but
one of the best things everybody can do when it comes to college is to have some really good probables and high probables where you have a very high probability of admission. And it's probably best to have a professional help you with that because the public tends not to be that great at assessing that. Some people can do it, but most don't do that well. That you really like. Like, I find when I work with students, everybody understands they can't have all these reach and stretch goals on their list. They recognize they do need to have some, some people call them no problem schools. That's another term for them. I don't like to use the word safety schools unless they admit by numbers, because a lot of times you can be really strong and they can waitlist you because they think, oh, you're probably not coming here. We don't get very many kids like you. But I call them probables, and some high probables would be 90% plus would be my projected my projection based on my experience. Kids understand they need to have them on their list, but a lot of times their mindset is, well, I'll put them on there to satisfy you, but I'm not going there. And what I'm challenging people to do is to have some high probables that you would be happy to go to. And if you can put yourself in that state of mind, then you'll have a whole different emotional experience going through this process. You'll be like, I've already got a couple of schools that, and Dave, I have to give you credit because you did that all along.
Yeah.
And working with you and Lauren, you always had that mindset. You saw many schools that were high probables for Lauren that you would have been perfectly happy to go to. And I think it really took a lot of the stress off of you in this whole process.
Well, Mark, the best thing you ever told me was build a good list and learn to love every school on your list. And I thought it was great. There were also some great schools that I'd never considered would be on the list that you directed us to. And honestly, there were a lot of schools that I actually was more excited about than the school that she actually went to. certainly schools with better weather. So yes, the concept of building a balanced list and learning to love every school on that list is the key to happiness and success in these very challenging college admission times.
Yeah, and that's what we're trying to do with the college spotlights. Like, we do get requests for some really highly selectives, and we do want to honor those requests. I have a pretty long list of highly selectives that people have sent in, and we'll get to those eventually. We've had requests to do Dartmouth. We've had requests to do Cornell. We've had requests to do Vassar and Swarthmore, and we'll get to those schools eventually. But I get excited about the College of Wooster, which is such an incredible school. You heard about it last week, and part 2 you hear about today. I mean, Lisa and I were serious. We were talking about what are the weaknesses of the school. I mean, maybe you don't like the location. Maybe it's too small for what you might like. I get that. But what an incredible opportunity. And I realize, it doesn't have every single major. So that could be, doesn't work for everybody. No school does. I get excited about schools like that. And when I look at a school like that, I think, throw the rankings out. They know what they're talking about if they don't realize quality at a place like this. So hopefully this was helpful. I love the article. Keep up the good work, Brennan. And Dave, good to have the birthday guy back.
Thank you. And Brennan, keep up your musical choices. Those nice.
Hey, Dave, got Dave breaking out a tune. I break it out every year with "It's Our Anniversary."
That's right.
And the other day I broke out 2 out of 3 Ain't Bad by Meatloaf.
That's right.
Yeah. Oh, by the way, Nemanja said to me, by the way, you need to chill on this because you might get in copyright infringement, man, if you keep putting too many of these songs out there.
The way we sing the songs, I don't think they're going to touch us.
And now it's time for a question from one of our listeners.
The next point is that politics can play a much bigger role in decisions than you think. And what do I mean by politics? Well, things like this. Let's say it's a feeder school that you used to getting a lot of kids from, and you haven't admitted kids for 3 years in a row. The counselor is going to be hot if we don't take this kid. Like, I don't want us to lose this school and have them not refer us, so we better take a kid. That's politics. Or, you know what? We're going to take this kid and this kid because they're institutional priorities for us, and there's several kids that are way stronger. And if we don't take this one kid, there's going to be chaos in the community. So let's take this other kid just to tamp things down. Or how a school might handle a sibling or an alumni or even a faculty kid. Or there's just so many different ways where the decisions that come out oftentimes are influenced by what the impact would be if they made a different decision as opposed to just the merits of the kid. So anyway, I've been talking a little bit, Lisa, let's hear what you're thinking.
Oh, I think all that's really true. And it's a little bit depressing. And frankly, it seems a bit unfair to students and families. I think we can't look at a kid and say maybe a kid doesn't know what they're doing. They apply, they shoot too high, their first ED, they get rejected. They start looking at schools that are more realistic, and they wouldn't have a big lead time on that. But then if there might be great candidates and now very interested in that school. And if they're going to get dinged because of that, it seems a bit unfair, but it's all unfair.
I don't disagree with that, but it's also stuff that is just in your best interest to do. So let's say, for example, you're looking at 2 alumni kids. And neither one of them are strong enough for you. But this one alumni, they are so connected in the alumni community. This is going to reverberate back to us, and we'll have hell to pay if we don't take this kid. You're just naive to not consider things like that because you'll just be making your job so much harder if you just ignore all those kinds of factors.
Right. I'm just saying a lot of kids and families are naive in this process. And
sure.
I think it's unfair to expect them not to be, So that seems to be hard.
When I was sitting in, a file reading, obviously I'm not going to mention the names of schools, and it was a kid that a school was not going to take. And it was a rural kid, and they were trying to get way more rural kids. And they said, and so the debate was, do we deny this kid because we're clearly not going to take them? And then the decision was to waitlist the kid because this is a very selective school. And they said, this is one of the strongest schools this kid has, that this school has. If we deny this kid, they're not going to send us anybody. Like, that's what I mean by politics. So the decision was made to waitlist so that at least the counselor would not shut you off.
Right. And I mean, that's all very true, but I'm specifically referring to the use of metrics and Slack and all these things.
Slate, not Slack.
Sorry. See, I told you it's getting later. The brain stopped working.
Hey, at least you didn't say Tyler.
I'm going to have to see if Tyler Swift is a singer now. But I think that Slate, that kind of stuff, I don't like it. I think it has a bad, unsavory feel. It's a little bit big brothery, like you're spying on kids. And I understand everyone's got to look out for themselves, but I do not think most families truly understand that. And I think most schools don't want them to understand it because then it'll stop working. So it seems disingenuous to me, but what can we do?
Yeah, and I see it more in the context of, well, there certainly are some practices that I feel are over the top. I'm not saying everything that happens is legit, but I see it more in the category of your job as an admission officer is enrollment, and the public thinks your job is to admit the strongest kids, but your job is to find people that are acceptable, that will make your community stronger, but that will come, and it becomes a really helpful tool at doing that. And so I don't really see it as an evil. I see it as something the public is naive about. But something that can really be an asset in helping you to do your job, which is to enroll kids, not just to give them a ribbon and a prize and then they don't come. Because of the fact that it's so competitive out there, like, that's a tool that you have to decrease some of the competition. You got to remember, like, some of the other stuff that's happening on the other side is kids are applying to crazy numbers of school. I was listening to this admission officer from Vermont, and he was saying, I was talking to a student on a school visit, and I said, how many colleges are you going to apply to? And the student said 45. And he was doing a presentation, and he said, I don't know what to say other than, and he screamed. He's like, what am I supposed to do if I have a 1 in 45 chance of getting this kid? So, like, right. if you look at it from the school's perspective, they have to kind of find ways to manage the fact that people are applying like 20 and 25 schools.
Yeah, but there's a reason that people are doing that, because nobody really, like, I've sat with a lot of kids doing supplement essays, and they do not seem to be having the best times of their lives. I mean, people are doing it because it's an arms race. And I think, in my opinion, I don't want to get in a long argument about this, but I know who started that arms race, and it's not the families and the kids. They're reacting to an ever-changing situation in which, it's the rules of the game and the rules of engagement are constantly being changed, and they're not being told.
Yeah, we do have different perspective, because I would say, and I'm going to say this and stop it, otherwise we'll be in round 4, which we vowed we wouldn't do. I would say that this happens because people have too many. It's the whole thing. College is not hard to get into, but the only schools that they're interested are the ones that are hard to get into. Yeah. So there's a obsession with going to a really hard to get into school by too many people that creates this incredible logjam. And then people hear it's hard to get in. So then they think, well, the answer to that is apply to more. When the answer should be to accept the fact that schools other than the 1%ers are really, really good. So that's my last word on that, Lisa, because otherwise we'll be tussling. But I have a feeling you might agree with me a little more than you're letting on. Am I right or wrong?
I agree that, that kids, families should realize, is, what did Gary Clark say, that selectivity is not a proxy for quality. Yes. I think that is something that everyone,
and they don't get that. They don't get that.
But there's a reason that they don't get it. And that's, there's a whole, like U.S. News and World Report, there's a whole industry that, like, is perpetuating that stereotype. That's true. And that's not the family's fault, and maybe it's not the college's
but
fault,
you know what?
Except to the extent that they participate in it.
I was listening to, what is his name? David Hawkins, and he was having a conversation with Peter Van Buskirk about rankings. And he was like, before U.S. News and World Report, people still use selectivity. They just use selectivity as their metric. So it's, I think it predates that. But anyway, I think, we kind of agree, we disagree. That's cool. That's what makes the life go around. I don't think we disagree too much, though, on this one. Next is these supplemental essays that you have to write, they're really, really important. They count more than people think. People think of them, oh, the little shorty 150 worder, like they put all this time into the personal statement. I think this little shorty, this little 200 worder. These things are really important. These are the only things that the schools got to pick. And they are so intentionally picked. And why do you think so many schools have a YS essay? So many have them because they learn so much information from that. They learn, first of all, they learn your interest level by how much research you put in, and then they learn whether you're a match. And so, like, they just count so much more than people realize. And that also pertains to the other, not just the YS, but all the other school-specific essays. They really, really, really count a lot. And the reason is, especially now, because as we moved away from test scores, other things take on more importance. And a lot of times you'll hear people say, well, that puts more emphasis on rigor and grades. Yeah, it does, but other things it puts an emphasis on. And the other thing it really puts an emphasis on is having what's called a purposeful application. A purposeful application is extremely important. And what do I mean by a purposeful application? It's well thought out and it is aligned. It shows that you are aligned with the values and the perspective of the school. Like what you're looking for and who you are is what they want. What you're looking for is what they offer. Some schools call this affinity. Some schools call it alignment. And the essays are really a huge place where that part comes out. And so there tends to be a lot of emphasis on the personal statement with people and not as much emphasis on these college-specific ones. And these things are oftentimes like who gets in and who doesn't is based on how good of a job you show you have alignment and affinity with the mission and values of the institution. Any thoughts on that, Lisa?
Well, I think that, of course, writing becomes more important. And I think I've seen a lot of very thought-provoking and, conceptually complicated supplemental essays this year. So I definitely think that they are important and they do take a lot of time. I also think that this is one of the cases where, they say that essays in some ways are more discriminatory than test scores to lower income students or first generation students because they don't have, the kind of advising that would allow them to know what kinds of things to say or how to position themselves. And so that's a little bit concerning, but.
Mm-hmm. We agree 100% on that. This is something I've been really outspoken to when I've talked with schools. Like they'll say it all the time, like, you got an LRS, you got an LRS. I've said, you realize that's pure coaching, right? I say Every kid, I don't care how smart they are, they do not write a good first draft. It's like, I'll say never, I'm not saying never, but maybe 2 or 3% of kids do a really good first draft on a college specific essay. And it's just pure coaching. Yeah. And so this is definitely a place where having resources gives people a huge advantage because schools are dinging you because you didn't nail that thing. And it's not a question of intelligence, like super smart. And it's not even a resource thing. Like well-resourced affluent students, they come in and they do a really bad job on their first draft because they just don't know how to do them.
Well, it's a very specific style of writing. It's kind of research-based, but also marketing yourself, I think. And, what I find with students is by the end of the process, their first drafts are much better than they are at the beginning because they start to learn what they should be doing in these essays, and then it becomes easier. But it's definitely a learning curve.
You actually nailed it.
Getting a lot of help.
It's a combination of research-based, because you got to show the school you've done your research on who they are, and then marketing, and you have to do it tactfully. That's kind of a combination of both, and it is a very specific style of writing. And so anyway, that people just don't realize how important those schools are for those who have them. You got to realize, writing, it takes time. It adds to the workload for the admission officers. So anything they're putting that much time into, they're going to value, right? Like they wouldn't have you do something that takes them time to do if they didn't value it.
Right.
Next is how much authenticity matters. Like that's really, really important to schools. They're very much aware that people sort of try to craft an application with the goal of getting in. Their starting point is, what do I need to do to get in? And that causes them to present themselves a lot of times differently than who they really are. And so schools, one, they value authenticity tremendously. And two, they have a really good antenna for it. They have a good antenna for hearing the parent voice and hearing and can say, this was not done by a 17-year-old, 18-year-old. They can pick that stuff up. They develop a really, really sharp discernment skill there. Another is how much intellectual curiosity is valued. Like, especially as you go up the selectivity tier, that is so valued. They want someone who loves to learn for the sake of loving learning. It's kind of a hard task because they're asking you to get really, really good grades, but don't do it because you want to win awards. I want to see that because you just love learning, and they're looking for that kind of mind, and they really value that. And that's oftentimes the difference between who gets in and who doesn't get in is who showed intellectual curiosity. Any thoughts on either of those, Lisa?
Oh, I mean, I think they're both really true. It's hard. I think, you have to present who you are. And of course, you want to present yourself in the most positive but accurate light. So you want to enhance your strengths, maybe, not put so much emphasis on the things that are harder for you if you don't have to. And that's something you have to do. But if you're not authentic, I think like it doesn't matter if you get in or not because they're not accepting you. It's you have to spend 4 years there. These people have to like who you are and you have to like who they are. And so I think it's hard for kids to get their mind around that.
Yeah, no, I agree. Now this is one that's more recent, but now that schools are doing all this virtual programming, there is really an expectation that you are taking advantage of that. There is not an excuse anymore. Before, you would actually get some slack because a lot of times schools evaluated. There was a lot of emphasis put on who visited and who didn't. But then the schools would always say, well, wait a minute, we can't, like it could be a resource issue and all that. So there was always a tendency not to hold that against people. But now that all you have to do is log into your computer, like there is a high expectation of the amount of you attending and availing yourself of their virtual programming. And if you don't do that, it's just a sign to them that you're just not interested in us. That may not be true, but that's the way it's working out there. Another is that mistakes get made more often than people may think. Like especially with like complicated transcripts. Like sometimes mistakes just get made. Like somebody has to evaluate what this means on this transcript with these different kinds of transcripts, or even things like is there a lot of grade inflation or not grade inflation? And like those kinds of things can ding a kid. Like a hard grader, like a lot of times that will not get picked up. I do not trust that schools will pick up someone that had a really hard grader. And so, I get concerned sometimes when a parent says like this teacher's like notorious for like hardly giving out any A's. Like some admissions officers would catch that, some just won't. Mm-hmm. And that's what I mean and transcript errors happen as well, like reading a transcript and understanding it. I see this and I have conversations with schools too. Like I'm fortunate enough that on my school side, I can still have counselor calls. And sometimes I can on my, independent side, depending on not as often, but, and so they'll say things to me about this stuff, that's how I know this. Grade trends impact decisions much more than people think. Like, sometimes I'll have some kids that can get in some really selective schools that had some bad ninth grades, like pretty bad ninth grades, because it was so long ago and they had an upward trajectory, and that can really, and of course the opposite can also, like, it's really rough. If you're going down in 11th, that's rough. Like if you're going your way down in 11th, like most of the time, you're probably going to need to rework your list. I'm not saying every single school has to come off, but you're going to need to add some schools if you came in thinking you had a balanced list and then you tank in 11th, because they're not going to say when the kids are like, well, I still have a 3.61 GPA. Yeah, but you got a 3.1 in 11th, like grade trends is 11th grade. I should probably just say 11th grade really, really, really counts a lot.
Yeah.
In the process. It's the last full year. It's harder work. Like decisions are getting made. That last year of 11th, or if you're applying in 12th, like for regular admission and they get to see that first semester of 12th, that's huge too. That last year and a half, depending on the schools, because some schools are making decisions without that 12th, but that part is, it might be 70% of the evaluation and then maybe 25% is 10th. It's hard to just put a number on it because it varies from school to school, but I can't speak enough like on grade trends. It's just really, really, really huge. Anything you want to say?
Well, I mean, it's hard. It's sometimes I feel like college admissions for kids, it shouldn't be like this, but it feels like a sudden death grade kind of situation, and that's why it's good to know that grade trends are more important than if you kind of screwed up in one class in ninth grade and then it got better. But it does really, I don't think a lot of kids truly realize how important junior year is, and how they, need to bring their best stuff to the table that year, and make it a priority.
Yeah, and I always feel bad for people, and I have a few every year like that. They did really well in ninth and 10th, and then 11th was, and especially with COVID, I saw way more of it than I normally do because it was just tough, especially was even worse last year than this year because I felt like it was more online, and not everybody does well in that environment. And so I saw a lot more kids that had a negative 11th grade. Now, the good news is I felt like there was a little more slack than the past because of COVID, but not at the highest levels, more at the mid levels. Did you see that? The highest level there was like, well, I understand you didn't do well, but I can't justify taking you over somebody that did do well, even that I feel for you kind of thing. Now, another thing is how much admissions is different. If you were to work at like a liberal arts and science school versus a national university, like they can be very different. Like everybody wants a good student, everybody wants a good citizen, everybody wants someone that will contribute. But the whole process of liberal arts, like highly liberal arts and science schools, they expect your skills to be strong across the board, because they train the mind in a very interdisciplinary way. And so a lot of people think, well, I'm applying to liberal arts and science school, so maybe it's not that important if I don't take like advanced math or science. I mean, you got to do that because they look at all of that. Where national universities, a lot of times where you're applying into a major or even into a college, like they'll be much more likely to compartmentalize. And, I was talking to a student, a parent of a student, and I was kind of surprised because the student has gotten into some really selective schools, with, more B's on their transcript than I would have thought. But as the conversation went on, I realized, okay, this is a student applying in engineering, and he's like crushing the math awards at a super competitive school. And so, like, there's a lot more of that. Well, you're applying into a major where you're doing extremely well in the stuff that correlates with that major. And so we're going to put so much more of the evaluation on the subjects that are related to that major you're interested in. And so national universities tend to function that way more when you're applying either into a college within a university or into, or directly into a major. And schools really are looking mostly at they do put much more emphasis on the core classes than they do on the electives. Like the electives are important, and yeah, but they're really looking at that academic GPA, that math, English, science, social science, foreign language. It's huge, and one of the big mistakes people make is that they take a light load senior year. Like there's an expectation that your rigor will increase every year. And one of the things I think that would surprise people is how much emphasis is actually put on rigor. I think people think there's more focus on grades, and obviously there's focus on both, but there's a huge focus on rigor as you look at more selective schools. Like they'll pass on that kid with all those A's that did not challenge themselves and did not take the more demanding classes. They really, really will. So this is maybe not a super significant one, but I wanted to throw it in there because I think it would surprise people. Students use a lot of abbreviations of like internal baseball stuff that they just expect you to know. Like, I'll give an example of one that I experienced this year. A student was constantly replying to always referring to GR all the time. GR, like, I really like it in GR. And I'm just like, what is GR? And it's like, oh, Girls Rock. It's a club I'm in called Girls Rock. Like, you get a lot of that, like this. And it's kind of understandable because you're just so used to throwing the initials around in your own circle that you don't realize, oh, snap, other people don't know that. So that's just a minor thing, but I think it's something that that would do that. Now I'm going to see if I can bring this one out without raising the wrath of Lisa. So it's the whole thing about protecting the profile. That's actually really important to schools. It's almost sacred. Like so many stakeholders are watching Your alumni are watching. Your board of trustees is watching. Your president is watching. Parents are watching. The donors are watching. The faculty is watching. Students are watching. President's watching. And they're looking, not just did you fill the school, but did you fill the school what they perceive to be like better applicants than the year before? Or so it's partly protecting the profile, but it's partly just how many stakeholders you kind of are answering to. Like there's so many people like spying on you to see whether or not you did a good job. And it kind of goes back to that thing that I said before about people look for people like themselves, right? So like your alumni, they're really going to be looking at the alumni numbers. It's how being an interesting kid can be a hook.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's one thing that I think might surprise people to be, everybody thinks it's all about like numerical stuff. Like what are your grades or what are your scores or maybe what are your extracurriculars or what are your, your recs and all that. But just being interesting, like for example, I'm working with a student right now who's a comedian and he's won lots of comedic. What's the word? Comedic awards? Comedic?
Yeah.
I think, yeah. His goal is to be like on Saturday Night Live. And he just presents as an interesting kid. And I think that's really going to help him in the process. Some other things, like let's say somebody is a juggler and they juggle and they perform at birthday parties or they do magic tricks or, those kinds of things. You're reading it's kind of, what it's like that just popped into my head. It's like adding spice to your food. It's just that extra flavor that adds something to the community. Isn't this cool? We're getting the magician. We're getting the juggler. They can maybe perform at a student event in the student center, kind of. So that's just a little hook that I think might surprise people, how that can sometimes bump somebody from maybe a wait list to an in pile. Now, my next one is back to the whole numbers thing in schools. So colleges can game their numbers a lot of times, and it's done in subtle ways. And this is an example. So let's say a school's got a 20% yield, which means that they have to take 5 kids to get 1. So the way they present the data is they say, we had 30,000 applications, for 3,000 spots. And people say, wow, they're only taking 1 out of 10. Because that's the way that looks on paper, right? You had 30,000 applications for 3,000 spots. But if you have to take 5 to get 1, then you have to take that 3,000 times 5. That means they had to accept 15,000 to get the 3,000 because they're only getting 1 in 5. But instead of saying we had 30,000 applications, we accepted 15,000, it doesn't look as good. So you say we had 30,000 apps for 3,000 spots. That's just one example. There's other things as well. There's things that are like complete misrepresentation, like bull-faced lies. And there's things that are more manipulative. I would call this more manipulative because nothing they said was untrue, but it is designed to create a certain kind of effect.
Right.
And there's a lot of that goes on. Now, that's largely because of how much pressure schools feel. But anyway, more of that goes on, I think, than people might realize. The next one is how often decisions come down to course selection. Maybe this one won't surprise people. Maybe it will. But course selection is a really big factor in who gets in and who doesn't. And I think people have a tendency to think it's more about grades, and course selection. It's about both. But course selection is like schools in a minute. They really are being honest, like more selective schools when they say like they're not impressed with really, really high GPA and you took a little bit of the easier road taken.
Right.
Yeah. Here's another one. So college admission officers are often asked, who would you rather take? The well-rounded kid, versus like the well-lopsided kid, right? And what you'll typically hear as an answer is, well, we want both kids. And that's an example of the fact that that's actually a true statement. They do take both kids. So it's not inaccurate. But it's also true that they partly say that, one, because they don't want to discourage people. And 2, they don't want people to say, well, let's say they say, well, we're more likely to take the kid that's gone deep in an area. What if you're talking to an audience and most of the kids out there are not like that? Now you've just discouraged half the people. And so you have to kind of talk that way sometimes in admissions so you don't discourage the masses. So the real answer is at a more competitive school, you have a much better chance if you're spiky or pointy, or if you have something that makes you distinctive. I call it being the unique piece of the puzzle. You're much more likely to be competitive and to stand out. You're much more likely to look vanilla and just get lost in the mix if you do a lot of things like pretty well without having any things that stand out. And that's not often how that question is answered. And so I think it can give a false impression. So take a stop there. Anything you want to comment on?
I absolutely think that point about course selection is a really great one to remind people of. And I'm just kind of shocked sometimes at public high schools how little parents are told about that impact. Like people are shocked when I tell them, no, you need 4 years of English. Well, I only need 3 to graduate and I don't really like it. I'm like, dude, I don't care. You're going to put yourself in AP Lit, if you want to apply to those schools. And like, no one's telling them that. I had a friend and her kid was a sophomore in Illinois and was wanting to go to one of the UCs. And so they go to get the schedule from the counselor and there's no art in it. And so the parents complain and say, well, really, he needs a year of art in order to apply for the UCs. And the counselor says, well, there are many fine schools here in the Midwest. And you're just kind of shaking your head. Like, why would you want to limit a kid? Because you don't want to put an art in their schedule. So that's kind of thing I think parents really have to sometimes advocate for their children.
Well, it takes knowledge first. First, you need to have the knowledge. I was really happy. I did a curriculum planning session with a kid from Walter Payton, which in Chicago. And their requirements are really robust, in order to their graduation requirements. They were like 4 years of math, 4 years of English, 4 years of science. They generally want them taking 4 years of a foreign language. And you can do like 3 years of a social science, but maybe like 4 if you're interested in that, 3 to 4 on that. So I'd like to see schools line up their requirements more in line with what some of these schools expect, because that's where a lot of the problem lies right there is the disconnect between the graduation requirements and what the schools want. And if you're not getting guidance from somebody.
No, you would have no idea.
Yeah, you'd have no idea.
I got into a fight online on curriculum night for the public high school here, because they have like the social studies path.
Sure.
And in your senior year, you have to take economics and personal finance. I'm like, well, can't you substitute AP Econ? And they're like, oh, no, you can't do that because it doesn't teach you about personal finance. Like, it's just a semester. Can't you do AP Econ and personal? No, we don't allow that. I'm just like, well, why not? And it just didn't go anywhere.
Well, I do have mixed feelings on that, though, because I'm a big believer on schools need to be teaching people about money. Like, it's just ridiculous that how little people learn about money, about credit and investing and all that. Like, that's just, why are the schools not teaching that,
Well, but like, I don't know how it is here, but in Vernon Hills, Lily had took personal finance. And this was when I was doing my IEC training, and I was in the financial aid class. And I contacted the teacher and said, listen, you really need to, if you're not already, and I haven't seen it, you need to be teaching these kids about student loans, because that's the first major financial decision they're going to have to make. And she said, you know what, we don't have any time for that.
Well, yeah. Well, I can't do it if the curriculum's not good.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, if the curriculum is great, then that's like a very good life skill.
Yeah, and most places are not teaching it, by the way. So it's good that she got it at Vernon Hills. That is not the norm. Sounds like it needs a little bit of
help,
upgrades.
Though, but anyway,
maybe the curriculum was. I don't know if that's on Lily or.
I'm pretty sure Lily is. She's just not one of those people who really thinks budgeting is fun.
Hey, can't help you on that one.
No.
So this one I kind of alluded to last time, but it's just so important. I just want to kind of come at it again, and that is, especially at selective schools, and especially now in this test optional climate. Like, what is really going to differentiate kids is who shows a demonstrated understanding, who shows they understand what the school offers, and they present themselves as someone who's in line with the mission of the school, the values of the school. And it's like you're rowing in the same direction the school is rowing. And that is one thing that I see having more emphasis than ever as we've moved away from test scores. Like, people think, oh, it's all about just going toward more emphasis on curriculum. Yeah, it's curriculum, but it's also your ability to show affinity and alignment with who the school is, what they value, and you showing. So a lot of this obviously is the college-specific essays, right? The custom questions. But it's other things too. And this one is just so important. when it comes to who gets in and who doesn't. And I'm emphasizing it more than ever with students. Friends, this is the end of part 2. We hope you'll join us next week for our final segment.
And now this week's interview with a special guest.
Friends, by the way, you're going to see a few longer episodes for last week. You probably noticed that this week and probably the next week. There are a few reasons for that. We put it out there that if you requested a call spotlight and you have a senior, let us know. We got a pretty good response from that. So we're trying to get those in. Also doing this bonus section. Last week I let the section with Vince go really long because I thought the stuff he was talking about UC Berkeley was really profound. Our surveys indicate 80% of people like longer episodes, 20% don't. If you're one of the 20% that doesn't like our longer episodes, just use the show notes and treat our podcast like four podcasts in one. You have it in the news, you have a question, you have an interview with a thought leader, and you have a college spotlight, and use it to jump to the sections that interest you. But you're going to see some longer episodes for a few weeks because we're trying to get these spotlights in before seniors have to decide on their college. Okay, friends, I think you're going to like this. It's a 2-part series with Chris Peterson and Kellen Manning talking about social media and college admissions. And they'll start out with their backstories, and you'll learn about what they do, and then they'll talk about social media. Listen and enjoy. Friends, I'm here with Chris Peterson and Kellen Manning from MIT's admission office. Welcome to the Your College Bound Kid podcast, Chris and Kellen.
Yeah, nice to meet you.
Good to be here.
Thanks. So why don't you each take a few minutes and tell us a little bit about your backstory, where you grew up, various admission roles you've had, communication roles, really sort of anything that you want to share to give us a little background.
Sure, I'll start. I have been in the MIT admissions office for a little over 11 years. I applied to this job because there was a financial crisis when I graduated college, and I applied to every job that I could find, and this is the only one that called me back.
Here's some honesty.
And I just took it, expecting to go to grad school and, I don't know, be a professor or something in a couple of years. And I fell in love with the work, and I've been here. I've been here ever since. I started helping to run the website, moved over into recruitment and selection work, and now work on a variety of special projects alongside my colleague Kellen here.
Now, where'd you do your undergraduate?
I went to the University of Massachusetts at Amherst.
So that's good. It's not even sort of your internal MIT connections that kind of landed you the job there.
No, I had never really known anyone who'd gone to MIT. I didn't know anything about the place. I'd grown up in New England, been born in Massachusetts. But first time I stepped foot on MIT's campus was being 30 minutes late for my job interview and getting lost along the infinite corridor.
You still got it. And you still got it. Somebody can interview their socks off.
I'm very fortunate.
I guess so. Kellen, what about you?
So I'm a bit more of a traveler. So it started pretty much the same way as Petey, except I finished undergraduate and no one would hire me. So I went to grad school. Then I finished that, and then I just applied for tons of jobs. And then my first job out was at Boston University, and as a temp in their alumni association doing communications, where I just ran their email, their social media, their website stuff. Then from there, I moved to MIT the first time, where I worked in student life, and same thing, communications work for them with their social media presence and their website. And then I moved over to Harvard, where I worked in their undergraduate communications office, and then I came to MIT back again, where I work in the admissions office, but also I'm a communications officer. So this is a 2-point job, which most people in the admissions office at MIT have secondary roles where we don't just read applications and sit in committees. We also have the secondary job. Mine is a full-time communications person too. So I work on print pieces, digital stuff. So website, social media. I work on the blog team with Petey, and we just do a bunch of different things. Yeah.
Great. Well, that's a perfect segue, because our topic for today is, what can a student learn from a college's social media presence? Quick question for you, Chris. I know Kellen always calls you Petey. Do I call you Petey or Chris?
You can call me either. There's like 4 people named Chris in our office,
Okay.
including when I was on the communications team, 3 people on the communications team.
Oh, wow.
None of us had very original parents, and so I was always called Petey in high school and college, and I got the email address petey@mit.edu. So if it's whichever feels more comfortable.
I'll go with Petey. And I
Okay,
can
sounds
relate
good.
because, I was in gym class once and there were 5 marks.
Right.
And so
right.
my nickname is Stuck for my last name, and Stuck is just stuck wherever I went.
I was going to say, there we go.
Everybody calls me Stuck and I actually like it, so it's all good. All right, so Petey and Kellen, there's at least 6 very popular social media platforms, probably more now. All these new ones coming out I can't keep track of, but certainly I think of blogs, I think of Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, Twitter, and LinkedIn. How does MIT use those platforms in different ways?
So first you start with the blogs, which Petey can probably talk about more that since he's been working with the blogs for about 10, 30, 40 years now. I don't know how long Petey's been around, but the basic idea for that is back when blogs were at their height of being a thing, we just wanted an avenue where students and staff could speak directly to our audience. And the main goal of that has always been transparency. So they talk about when things are going well. They talk about when things are going poorly. They talk about different resources that they've used and how they've used them. And it's just a spot for students to have a space. Petey, anything you want to add to the blogs? Or
Yeah, I think the only thing that I would add to what Kellen already said is the way that we have used our platforms at MIT Admissions is to think about where are our MIT students telling their stories, and how can we use the admissions office's entrapped audience to amplify those stories through our various channels. And this is different from a more traditional marketing approach, I think, where it's, okay, these different channels exist. How can we broadcast our own institutional message most effectively through them? And I think one of the people, I started working on the blogs where this was a practice that had already been started by Matt McGann and Ben Jones, who had started up the blogs in the mid-2000s by just centralizing what MIT students were already writing on our website. And then I was actually in Kellen's first go-round at MIT in the Division of Student Life. I think doing some really innovative stuff on Instagram and some other platforms that had historically, I don't think, been effectively used in this kind of way. And I think that's been the guiding light, the North Star for our admissions office, is thinking that our students are the best ambassadors for MIT and seeking ways that we can amplify them rather than be the authors ourselves.
Let's take a break to learn about Mark's recommended resource for the week.
Friends, I'm here with Emma Vigneault, and for our recommended resource for this week, she's here to talk to us about The Slice. Go ahead, Emma. Tell us about The Slice.
Hi. Yeah. So The Slice is a weekly newsletter from Applerouth Tutoring. We've got expert articles on everything college admissions and standardized testing. The articles are, some are focused on students, some parents and educators, and you'll see topics like how to build a testing timeline, what testing looks like in this test optional world, supporting students with learning differences, and even stuff like balancing video game screen time.
So who would you say The Slice is ideally suited for?
Yeah, The Slice has stuff for students, parents, educators, anybody interested in college admissions or kind of going through that process right now.
And how often does it come out?
It comes out every week, and every week we have expert guest authors, such as none other than yourself, Mark Stucker, who recently wrote an article for us about college campus tours. And there should be a link to that in the show description. And from that link, you can read the wonderful article, and you can also sign up for the newsletter to stay in touch.
And how do people sign up?
Yeah, they can sign up by clicking on the link in the show description, or they can go to applerouth.com and scroll down to the bottom of the page. That's Applerouth, ROUTH. And they'll also find a schedule of our free weekly webinars. We do a ton of webinars every week. Some great ones coming up that are totally free. On the 21st, we have one about managing academic anxiety. And on the 29th, we're having a roundtable panel with some top college admissions directors from Georgia Tech, Cornell, and George Washington University. So that should be a really cool discussion.
Emma, this has been great. Thanks for coming on and telling us about the slice.
Absolutely.
That's probably a good point for me to throw in a little something here. So one of the reasons I was really interested in interviewing you guys, two reasons really. I attended a conference, it's an admissions training certification conference. I attended Harvard SECA conference, and I attended a presentation there on social media presence done by MIT, the admission office there. And I was really, really impressed with the level of transparency that you were allowing your students to communicate with. They were saying some things that didn't always make MIT look the best. And there was a comfort level there that your administration was allowing. I was really impressed. And then in talking with, you mentioned Matt McGann, and talking with Matt McGann, who interviewed earlier, and he said, you guys, you need to talk to MIT about social media, because we were brainstorming topics. I said, Matt, you want to talk about social media? He said, you need to reach out to Petey. He's the guy. And then Petey said, Kellen's the guy. So that's how we got here today. So that's just a little bit of background. So thought I'd share that. Now, we've talked about blogs. What about the other things? There's other popular social media out there: Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. What are your thoughts on them? Do you see those as different media that you use differently? What do you want to share?
Yeah, so we're not on LinkedIn. It just, for our purposes of what we do, it doesn't make any sense. It's more of a platform made for, ideally, I guess, made for career development and networking on a professional level. While that could have potential benefits for current students or even high school students, it just wouldn't make any sense for us as an admissions office to focus on that platform. Twitter, also not a platform that we're a part of, just because it's not what we want to do. I mean, it's a strong platform, and I believe in it a lot for just the idea of connecting and a lot of conversations with individual people. But we like to take more of a targeted approach, as Petey said before, and that'd be more of an open shot to people to talk to us, and we wouldn't be able to speak directly to our audience the way we'd want to. Next, we have Instagram. Instagram, we recently changed the idea of the account with the pandemic. When we looked up one day and realized that if we can't be on campus to take pictures or interact with students, the account's pretty much useless. So what do? And I've been throwing around this idea of I wish there was I wish there were more channels out there where students just spoke about the things they enjoy, not so much MIT related, not so much classroom related, not so much what they think can get them into MIT or into what do you like to do, because that's a big part. We'll probably talk about this later, of the application that we have. Is what do you like? What do you enjoy? What are your passions? So what we did was we hired 8 to 9 students, and they made them the Instagram cast and said, post and just basically post the things you like, things you care about. You can go live, you can do pictures, you can do videos, you can do art, you can ask questions. The only thing we ask them not to do is be an open space for people to ask questions directly to us, because we have other platforms for that. We have student tours that we run online. We have student panels. We have Ask a Student at MIT email addresses where people can ask specific students specific questions, as opposed to just ask random people. So our Instagram is more of a space for students to kind of express themselves, to kind of open up the idea of, you don't have to give up a part of yourself to be at MIT, because there are so many different people with so many different interests here, no matter how random it is. I remember, was it 2 weeks ago, Cammie, one of our students, she did an Instagram live for 40 minutes just ranking all the One Direction songs. And that's what she did with it's like her and 50 other students in a room, 50 other prospective students in a room, just kind of talking about it, ranking them, just giving their thoughts on different songs, arguing. And it was really cool. We have another group of students, the George twins, Miles and Malik, who have become TikTok famous on STEM TikTok. But they during the height of application season, they were running a weekly game show based around STEM, where they were going live and inviting different people, other accounts, to come live with them and answer a STEM question in a field that wasn't their specialty. They'd ask them, so what are you interested in studying? Then, oh, you like biology? Well, we're asking you a physics question. And it kind of went like that. And they'd ask them 5, and if they got all 5, they won there was no prize, but people were really engaged in it. And then Facebook's an interesting space because it's an aged platform. Like students are still using it, but in very specific ways. So we have like the private class groups that we have, as well as we have the open group that we kind of tailor for sharing blog posts, sharing different resources that we offer, whether it's summer programs or advice that we have about, because people ask us all the time, what do we need to do to get into MIT? So we share a lot of content from the website. And then we have YouTube. YouTube, basically, our bloggers post there. We have a bunch of student workers and a marketing team that post different videos on there. And we also do our Pi Day videos. We post those on there also.
I would add that there's 3 platforms that I think are significant that weren't mentioned in the question.
TikTok's probably one of them, right?
Well, because Kellen did mention that one. I will say I'm too boomer to go on TikTok or comment on it. But we've made increasing use of Discord in recent years because a lot of our students, our admitted students, we found were just creating Discords to talk amongst themselves. And so we developed some programs with one of the MIT volunteer computing groups that created various Discord bots that could verify that a student was actually an admitted student in order to guard access to the group without us having access to all the student spaces, or the students having to know all of the private email addresses of all of their peers, because it was mediated by that bot. There's Reddit, where there's a lot of college questions. We don't have a formal conversation in Reddit, although I'll sometimes hang around r/applying to college and try to steer things in a slightly less toxic direction. And then the last thing is Quora. There's a tremendous amount of question and asking about applying to college on Quora, particularly from international students. And we've never had anybody in our office designated, student or staff, to spend time in Quora. We did have one former staff member, Latasha Boyd, who's now in college counseling at Phillips Andover Academy, and she would just spend downtime trying to be helpful on Quora. But that's one of these spaces where I think, they're not the big commercial social media platform, but if you look at the native energy of where teenagers are spending time, Discord, Reddit, and Quora are 3 of the spaces that are more text-based than TikTok, where I think there's a bigger disjuncture between the energy that you see colleges put into other platforms and where the energy from students is.
No, I'm really glad you brought that up, Petey. I know just from students I work with, it's the first time I ever heard of Discord. Like, what's a Discord? And I had a student in Connecticut break it all down to me and how effective it is and how much he gets from it. Friends, this concludes the first half of our interview. We hope you'll join us next week for the conclusion of what a student can learn from a college's social media presence.
And now it's time for our College Spotlight of the Week.
All right, Lisa, you ready for part 2 on College of Wooster?
I sure am.
So Wooster was actually founded as the University of Wooster in 1866 by Scottish Presbyterians. And another interesting fun fact is the College of Wooster became a founding member of the 5 Colleges of Ohio Consortium in 1996. So they basically merged their entire library with a number of other leading liberal arts and science schools, including Kenyon and Denison and Ohio Wesleyan, to form the library system. They have 16 residence halls, 30 different program houses. I mentioned last week, 99% of the students live in the residence halls. Now, one of the things that's really interesting is the international presence. So this is something that's more than 90 years old. So Elias Compton, who's a former dean of the college, founded Wooster of India. A program started in the 1930s, and it basically established a sister school relationship. And so the Wooster and Indian program has been created this unique bond between, Wooster and India. It's involved in exchange of students, and exchange of culture, and exchange of ideas. And the whole international presence has infected the entire campus. I mean, Wooster is routinely referred to as the most global and international school in all of Ohio. And 16% of their students are international, which is a high number when you look around. I mean, it's not Northeastern or BU, but that's a high number when you look at schools to have 16%. And when we get to our stats, I'll say how many countries make up that 16%. It's a lot. So the college has majors in cultural studies and international relations and 7 foreign languages, and they do go abroad to 60 different countries. So something that you can relate to, because I learned something about you. You've got a little Scottish in your blood there. What's the Scottish in your blood? Tell me about that.
It's from my paternal grandfather's side, and they were Scotch Irish, I think. So Scottish Presbyterians, and they took a lot of pride in that, and that's why we didn't celebrate St. Patrick's Day in my house. You wore orange instead.
There you go. Well, they are very proud of their Scottish heritage there. The Fighting Scots, as they say.
Exactly.
That's their nickname. They used to be known as the Presbyterians, but now they're the Fighting Scots. And the Scots have had quite some success on the athletic field. So in baseball, they've had 5 appearances in the NCAA Division III World Series, including a couple second-place finishes, most recently 2009. In the first decade of 2000, they won a higher percentage of their basketball games, 83%, than Duke or any Division I school.
Oh, I can't say that around here, Mark.
I know. Yeah. Well, listen, you have bragging rights after UNC spanked Duke. I absolutely loved that game.
I didn't watch the game, but I did see the party on Franklin Street.
It had to be live.
I mean, I saw it like on Facebook Live. I didn't actually go,
course,
but it was lit out there. I mean, and
I was about to say lit. Using my kids' words, it was lit.
Yeah.
Well, this was Coach Krzyzewski's big retirement. Something like 97 players are back. Duke had beaten UNC by 20 in Chapel Hill. And now you have his last game, and UNC, they didn't even substitute one player in the entire second half, and they just spanked Duke, and I loved every second of it. Sorry, Sophia and Carmen.
Cover your ears, Duke folks. He doesn't. He still loves you. He doesn't mean it.
Yes. So back to Wooster now. Academically, they've been standouts. So they've all academic All-Americans 32 times, and that's just since 2000. And the thing that's nice about them is they're balanced. So they're performing arts. I mean, first of all, they're home to what they call OLO, O-L-O, which stands for the Ohio Light Opera. It's an enterprise founded in 1979, not part of the curriculum, but it's a professional company entirely devoted to opera. They perform the entire Gilbert and Sullivan repertoire, which Are you an Oprah? Are you an opera person, Lisa?
I like both Oprah and
both
opera.
of them. You're Oprah,
but especially light opera. Like I'm very happy with Gilbert and Sullivan. I'd be very happy to go see all of those things.
Yeah. So it's really cool. They have an active on-campus pipe band, officially called the College of Wooster Pipe Band. Members perform many official events on campus, such as commencement, sports games, football, basketball, swim meets, lacrosse games, and many spontaneous and student events. But back to OLO, the Ohio Light Opera, it's the only professional company in the United States that is entirely devoted to, am I saying this right? Operetta?
Operetta. Yeah. Operetta.
You see how little I know. I'm all about the athletics and not the opera, but I respect them. I mean, they're very balanced. I mean, here's something that's incredible about them. 1 in 3 students plays athletics, which is a small school. You kind of expect that, but 1 in 3 is in a musical performance, and 1 in 4 do theater or dance. Mm-hmm. So that's pretty balanced. You've got your athletics, you got your musicals, you got your theater, and your dance. They do 2 big theater and dance productions and concerts per year. A huge one in the fall, a big concert, and a big spring concert, more of a formal one in the spring. And as far as one more thing I want to say about them when it comes to, I talked before about, Apex and how strong their career center is. Students get up to $3,000 to flip an unpaid internship into a paid internship through their summer program, which is just a phenomenal thing, especially if
so equalizing.
Yeah, it's equalizing. Yeah, if somebody wants to get ahead in their career, but they need to make money, you can do both if the school's going to pay you to do your, and it also opens up all kinds of opportunities for the Career Center to find unpaid internships if they don't have to pay you, and then they'll do the pay. So I love it when I hear that. So let's talk about some of their strongest majors. We talked about this before, but they're a pre-health and a pre-med powerhouse. Friends, after my recording with Lisa, I decided to look up their medical school acceptance rate. For 2019, it was 80%, and the national average that year was 41%. So neuroscience, very strong. Biochem, molecular biology, and chemistry, they produce some of the highest percentage of PhDs of any undergraduate school in the country. But they're also very strong in political science and international relations, psychology, music, English and history, and more recently, environmental studies. That's been a newer focus, but it's also a really strong program. They've got a very strong faculty. As far as overlaps, they overlap with a lot of the leading Midwest liberal arts and science schools, especially in Ohio, but not just Ohio. Denison, Ohio Wesleyan, Kenyon, Oberlin, Dickinson, St. Olaf, Lawrence, Rhodes. Those are huge overlaps for them, which probably shouldn't be surprising. And let's talk a little bit about their application process. They do have both ED1 and ED2 and early action. So they have all three of those early options and then regular admission. And one thing I love about their regular admission, guess what their deadline is?
March 1st.
You looked it up.
No, I'm just guessing.
Well, you got it right. That's awesome.
It felt like it to me. It felt like March 1st.
I kind of love that because, you get kids that learn about schools late and they haven't missed deadline.
Mm-hmm.
I have to say this. I'm working with a student who's transferring, and she came to me late, and I really, really felt Chapel Hill would have been a great place for her. And Chapel Hill is like a February 15th deadline for transfers. It's one of the earliest.
Really early, yeah.
Yeah, and so she missed it. And so I don't know. I just always like it when schools have a little bit more flexibility on that for people that learn about schools late.
Mm-hmm.
So some more things I like about them. They have no application fees for international or domestic students. That is just so welcoming.
Mm-hmm.
They've been test optional for a long time. Nothing new there at all. They do have, I mentioned this a week or two ago, they're a big recommendation school. So they require teacher recommendation. They allow 3 more, and they allow 3 other recommendations. They do have a why essay, your typical 250 word, why are you interested in Wooster, which is so common. And one thing I love, I'm a little biased about this, but I love schools that have interviews. I just do. I think you learn a lot of intangibles about students. So they call them conversations, and they're not required, but they are strongly recommended.
So basically required.
Yeah, and they are basically required for merit money. So if you want merit money, go ahead and interview. But when I see that, and I've done admissions both with interviews and without, it's just such a good way to get to know somebody holistically. It's kind of like getting a job. You wouldn't want to. Most of the time, if it's a high-level job, they wouldn't take you just off paperwork. They'd want to get a sense of knowing somebody. And I get why schools don't do it because of the manpower that they require. But it just shows me that they're really thoroughly trying to figure out, is somebody a match when they do that. They just have the one required question. So Lisa, can you see why I said I could see you at this place?
Oh yeah, I feel like that they're my people there. I mean, I haven't been there. I really want to go to visit it now because I just feel like, I'm buying what they're selling there. I love all the different opportunities they have for kids to really have mentored research, to have interdisciplinary experiences, small classes, a lot of fun activities. I love me some musicals. So, they've got that covered. So I just feel like it really offers a lot.
Yeah, very friendly, very warm, very much a community. When you see a school that's 99% residential, that's going to have a tight family. And you can really see this is an inclusion in the Colleges That Change Lives book. And this is a college that changes lives. You're going to be impacted by all of these things. And then on top of that, a lot of diversity. Now, I think it's really important. One thing I'm trying to emphasize with all my students is that no place is perfect.
Mhm.
And it's really important because if you elevate the expectations too high, there's nowhere to go but down. And so I really liked Sylvia's conversation a couple of weeks ago about like who UCLA is not for. And so I think it's important, and I'm going to start to do that more with college spotlights. So the people I would say Wooster would not be for, I definitely work with a lot of students, that will visit a school of 2,000 and say it's just too small.
Right.
And so that's one of those things you kind of know it when you visit.
Mhm.
And so it can either be super homey, 500 in a class, I love it. I love the closeness, the close-knit vibe, or it can just feel too small. And that's going to be a personal thing. For some, it'll be too remote, especially if you're somebody who really craves more urban life or bigger connection to urban life. I know places like, Akron are 35 miles away and Cleveland 50 miles away, but that's a long ways away when you're busy.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not like just you ride the bus for 10 minutes or walk downtown or something like that.
Although Worcester does have a really nice kind of public transportation system that can get people around locally, which is kind of cool. But so for some people, it would be too remote. Obviously, you got your weather weenies like me that I love the research, but give me Occidental because I can get that and I can get California sun. That's just, that's just me.
Well, that lake effect weather, that's real. I mean, it's definitely a thing, and they are not too far from the lake. And
well, one of the traditions they have, which is kind of cool, they've got this like big arch, and 2 a.m. in the morning, they go out and they take snow and they fill the whole arch up with snow. But I'll be in my bed snoring. Yeah. Okay.
Oh no, no. Well, at the University of Chicago, they would have like the I forget was it like, but anyway, the name. But people go. It's by February and they go run naked.
Well, there you go.
Campus, and I was like, yeah, y'all have fun. I'm gonna stay home in my pajamas.
Yeah. Thank you. I'll pass on that one too. If you're very conservative politically, you should know that Wooster is a left-leaning school. I asked multiple current students this year in preparation for this spotlight, Trump or Biden, who won the mock elections? How did the students at Wooster vote? And the response I received was overwhelmingly Biden, which is just something very conservative students might not be comfortable with. The last thing I'll say, and this isn't a right or wrong, it's just different strokes for different folks. I'll have students that will visit a place like Bucknell and say this place is way too preppy. Mm-hmm. And then I'll have a student that will visit another place like, just using examples of places that, I hear this from McAllister, and they'll say it's too sort of quirky, crunchy. And I mean, Worcester's definitely like more the quirky. You can just see it in how the kids dress, and there's nothing wrong with that. But that's not going to be everybody's vibe.
Sure.
So I would just say those would be some of the things. They have been acknowledged by so many different things, and within, we've talked about this before. For a while, we were, talking about this a lot. And I saw a recent survey that came in. Lisa, one of our participants said, I really miss when you were doing the Princeton Review stuff. Can you get back to doing that? So, we'll try to honor that. But I looked up Princeton Review, where they survey over 140,000 people. And this is all of the awards Wooster won there. One of the best schools in the Midwest, best value colleges, great professor accessibility, great race relations, great class interaction, one of the greenest colleges, one of the places where students study the most. Oh, now that's definitely Lisa.
Well, you know it. Where's the library?
Yeah. And then it also showed up for the best schools for internships, and then the best schools for making an impact. So that's a pretty good list to be on. And obviously, Princeton Review is already looking at what they regard as the top 3, whatever. I can't keep track, 373 or whatever they're up to. But within that group, it made a lot of their top 20s based on pretty large survey. So the last thing I'll share is the stats and see if you have any final thoughts here. So for stats, 1,924 students, 54.5% women, 55% acceptance rate, 48 states, 68 countries, which is a lot for a school did 2,000, 68 countries, 31% from Ohio, 45% of students are in the top 10% of their class, 71% in the top 25%. So I love that because you can tell by having 45% in the top 10%, they can challenge that really higher end kid. but yet there's still 30% that are not in the top quarter. So there's some range there they can take. 17% first gen, 16.5% Pell Grant recipients, which for a public school wouldn't be great. But for a private school with a $400 million endowment, that's actually exceptional. You know, I love me some Davidson College, except for tomorrow when they play my Michigan State Spartans in the NCAA tournament. But they have a $1.3 billion endowment, so 3 times more money than Wooster for the same number of students. And Davidson has less Pell Grant kids than Wooster does. Now, this isn't precise because the Pell formula looks at things like number of kids in college and family assets. But think of it as basically a family of 4 with 1 kid in college with typical assets making under $55,000. So 1 in 6 kids socioeconomically would be here. That would be in that income bracket. So you can't say that it's just our rich kids like you can about a lot of other private schools. Average GPA incoming 3.73. SAT 25th to middle 50%, 1150 to 1380. Middle 50%, ACT 24 to 31. And that's with around 2/3 submitting. So obviously we know that technically those scores would be lower if everybody had to submit. People are smart enough to know, oh, I'm not a good tester, I'm not submitting here. But you'll find that with every school. 15% yield, so they have to take almost 7 to get 1. Anytime you see that, by the way, friends, know that demonstrated interest is going to play a big role for any private school. 40% of classes, 9 or less. That's what you call individual attention. Boy, you cannot hide in there. They know if you did your homework.
No, you can't. No.
72%, 19 or less. Cost of attendance, 69.6, but average merit aid, 27K. That's a large average merit aid. I've worked with many students that have gotten 40 plus here. 2/3 white, 11% black, 8% Latino, 4% Asian, 16% international. 87.1% of students return for year 2. Pretty good retention rate. 70% for-year graduation rate. So there we go. Wooster, a great college that changed lives to add to our college spotlights, Lisa.
Next week in the news, are recommendation letters a form of discrimination? A great article by Scott Jasek from Inside Higher Ed. Question from a listener. Things Mark thinks would surprise listeners if they were to work in college admissions. That is the final part 3 of 3. Our interview is with Chris Peterson and Kellen Manning, 2 MIT admission officers, discuss what applicants need to know about social media. That's the final part 2 of 2. And our college spotlight is the College of Wooster in Wooster, Ohio. That's the final part 2 of 2.
Oh, and friends, always remember, it's not where you go, it's what you do when you get there and what you do when you get out of there. And one of my absolute favorite quotes in college admissions is that college admissions is not a prize to be won, but a match to be made. And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. If you find this podcast helpful, please subscribe so you get every episode as soon as it is released. If you are interested, there are a few ways you can really support our podcast. You can click the share button and send it to your friends and acquaintances. You can help us pay our staff and our expenses by donating on our website. You can write a review for us on your favorite podcast listening app. I am the producer of the Your College Bound Kid podcast. We have a fantastic team of 9 people. Shout out to our co-host, Dr. David Williams and Dr. Lisa Ruff. Our sound engineer who fixes all of our many errors is Nemanja Modfitch. The amazing music you hear is from Victor Allen Weeks. Marketing designs are from Kimberly Blass. Our image editor is Talha Khan. Joy Stucker does our website episode updates. And our webmaster is Dalianas Dimitri. If you want to have a college coaching session with me, just text me at 404-664-4340. If you have a question you want to ask, or a college you want Lisa or me to do a spotlight on, or if you have a recommended resource or an article you think we should share, just send it to questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. By the way, check out our website where you'll find lots of content that is not on any podcast app. Our website is yourcollegeboundkid.com. We think of you as our listening family, and we look forward to meeting again with you, our family, next week.